Gone but not forgotten, there are plenty of MCU characters who have bit the dust and are seemingly staying that way forever.
No, not anymore, surely.
Some of them sacrificed themselves to save the entire universe, others were villains that were vanquished by our heroes, and some of them were just written off before they ever had a chance to really shine.
Not alone!
There's so much variety out there in terms of deceased characters, but one thing they all have in common, they could totally come back to life. Some are easier than others to figure out how it would work, but it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about, so let's get into it right now.
Let's start over, shall we?
Okay, let's get the big one out of the way first. Yes, of course, I mean the genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Can we talk about this guy?
And I want to mention one thing right out of the gate. For I think all of these entries, I'll be talking about how these specific characters can come back in the MCU. So when I say it's feasible for Tony Stark to return, I don't mean seeing him as the evil, superior Tony Stark version from the comics ruling another universe. Although, Kevin Feige, I know you're a big fan of these videos, so please make the evil, superior Tony Stark version from the comics ruling another universe come back at some point.
We need to give you some new news.
But that's a story for a different time. Right now, it's about how we can bring back our Tony. And although this one might be the most requested out of anyone on this list, it's also the most complicated. And that's because the big issue with bringing these characters back is doing so in a way that doesn't completely undermine the emotional ending they created when they left. And with Tony, that's sorta hard. His demise was the absolute perfect ending for Endgame as the MCU closed the book on this chapter of the franchise in order to start another one. And if Tony Stark was magically revived somehow, a lot of that dramatic weight would be lost. So what I'm going to suggest for this character is already a bit of a cheat. What's that? Cheating already in the first entry? That's gotta be a new record, right? Anyways, I want Tony to return as an AI program. Yes, it's not quite Tony Stark, but his death comes with such dramatic consequences that there's really no way to do it normally. What makes the most sense is that someone like Spider-Man or even Ironheart downloads Tony's mind into an AI,
I have like a sixth sense.
and then we can still hear him mentoring and equipping in the MCU. And there is a comic precedence for this. When Tony Stark was in a coma in the comics, a version of the scenario played out with Ironheart, so it could happen here. After all, Ironheart needs to be a hero that's inspired and mentored by Tony Stark, and I think that's pretty difficult to do if Riri Williams doesn't have Tony Stark's voice close by, don't you think?
Right.
I think out of any villain we've seen in the MCU, the one that most people want back in some capacity is Killmonger. Played perfectly by Michael B. Jordan, Eric Killmonger was equal parts menacing, charismatic, and sympathetic. We don't necessarily agree with his methods, but we understood why he did what he was doing. A truly great villain changes our protagonist, and even though Killmonger was an extremist, his actions did lead T'Challa to realizing that Wakanda needed to open its borders and reveal itself to the world in order to help those in need.
Indingu Intadaka!
And even though Killmonger's demise was pretty apparent, I mean, his whole final scene was how specifically he chose not to live even though there was a chance he could have, it still hasn't stopped fans from wanting more Killmonger. And those desires only amplified after the tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman. Now, a storyline that a lot of fans can envision is Killmonger being resurrected in order to take on the Black Panther mantle.
Burn it all!
And although that kind of robs Killmonger of his ending, it would be fascinating to see. Say this resurrected version of Killmonger is still housing his grudges, but understands that his country needs him to be a proper leader, so he struggles with the new role.
The sun will never set on the Wakandan Empire.
That puts the character in a whole new environment and would make for a fascinating protagonist.
It's not my name, princess.
But that's not really answering the how'd he come back, right? Well, they could easily write it so the ancestral plane sends Killmonger's spirit back to the land of the living after T'Challa's death, but there's other options too. I mean, one time when he was gone in the comics, the Mandarin actually was responsible for resurrecting Killmonger, so imagine a situation where after Shang-Chi's solo movie and the giant wall of evil spirits, what if somehow Killmonger's soul was actually trapped behind there, and after Shang-Chi's big final fight, Killmonger's essence was reborn? I don't know, that'd be maybe too wild, but it would be some nice synergy with what's happening in Phase 4 right now.
Nah, I'm your king.
When Black Widow vaulted herself off that cliff in Endgame, did anyone else think that she wouldn't stay gone? I mean, I remember sitting in the theater immediately thinking about how her own origin movie that she had in the pipeline after Endgame, so I thought she'd be resurrected along with everyone else by the movie's end. But nope, there's no second chances so far for Black Widow. So if I wanted to bring her back in the MCU, how would I do it?
Control all that from here.
So it's been confirmed by the Russo brothers that after the Soul Stone is removed, the Red Skull Spectre thing is free to leave his prison.
If only it were that easy.
But what if, since he's all spooky and ghost-like now, he needs a body to possess? Well, the only body close by is Natasha, so imagine the Red Skull spirit inhabiting Natasha's body and infusing his mind with hers. Then you'd have a Natasha who has to actively fight back against the creeping powers of Red Skull. And yeah, it's nuts, but here's why I like it for the character. A lot of Natasha's arc in the MCU has been about erasing her past and starting fresh. Well, in this new phase, as she actively grapples mentally with Red Skull, she has to fight for her old memories in order to not have them erased. That means embracing everything she's done in order to keep who she is. The whole point of Ultron is that he's never truly gone. I mean, he's a super advanced AI program after all, which means when you destroy him, he'll just reveal that he downloaded a part of himself somewhere else and lick his wounds until the next time he attacks. And although Ultron is a major Avengers villain, the MCU movies weren't really concerned about the longevity of its villains in the first few phases of the MCU. That means Ultron was created and dispatched all in one movie. Yes, Ultron was recently the massive multiverse breaker villain in the What If show, but I'm talking about our version of Ultron and how he could come back. The MCU changed things by making Tony Stark and Bruce Banner create Ultron as a defense system in response to Tony's growing fears about an alien attack. But in the comics, it's Hank Pym who's mainly responsible for Ultron, so that's where I'd start. I would want a way for Hank and the Ant-Man team to be the ones responsible for the Ultron reemergence, as a way to fall in line with the comics, but how would it work? Well, maybe Hank steps inside the quantum disruptor and fiddles with the quantum inverser and accidentally hits the quantum Polaris sequence. Okay, yes, as Scott would say, I'm just putting quantum in front of words, but the point is that maybe quantum realm tampering leads Hank to somehow unlock a new version of Ultron for them to deal with. If Quicksilver is brought back to life in the MCU, the big question becomes which actor would play him? Sure, Aaron Taylor Johnson started in the role while Evan Peters was the Fox Universe's Quicksilver, but Peters was much more well received in the role. Then you add in that they already had Peters fill in for Taylor Johnson in WandaVision, which sadly only led to them wanting to make a Ralph Boner joke.
Boner.
As well as the fact that Aaron Taylor Johnson is now Kraven the Hunter in the Sonyverse, and it seems likely that Evan Peters would be Quicksilver going forward. And his resurrection might be one of the easiest ones on this list, since Wanda is getting to be so powerful that she can alter reality itself now. I've long thought that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness will result in Wanda somehow merging our universe with whatever new X-Men universe there is, or, at least open the door to it, because I like the thematic parallel of how in the comics, she gets rid of all the mutants in the House of M storyline, while in the MCU, she can be responsible for introducing them. And if she does all that, why not throw her brother a life vest, so to speak, and just bring him back to life? One time, when Quicksilver died in the comics at the hands of Magneto, Wanda just repaired his crushed body easy peasy a few minutes later. But I guess the downside is that we just witnessed Wanda processing her grief over Vision in WandaVision, so any other attempts to revive someone lost might be a bit of a retread. There's a lot of evidence that points to Thanos not being gone in the MCU. After all, when he snapped everyone away for 5 years and then they were snapped back, it was like almost no time at all had passed for them, making it seem like they were in some sort of limbo state rather than being straight up deceased. Then Iron Man did the same exact thing to Thanos and his forces, turning them to dust and then blowing away in the wind. So the big question becomes, is there a way to bring someone back from being dusted without using the Infinity Stones? That's an interesting question for sure. Maybe now that Eros, Thanos' better-looking brother, is hanging with the Eternals and the other Celestials, it's leading to the resurrection of Thanos. I mean, if anyone can bring back the Mad Titan, it's a Celestial, right? But we'll see. Though, if Thanos did come back now, what would he be like? He started the series obsessed with balancing the universe in order to save it in Infinity War, but then in Endgame he lost some of that layered characterization and rather just reverted to the whole destroy everything and rebuild in my image type of mentality. If he was resurrected now, it would be the 2014 version of Thanos, and he seems more brutal and insane than the Thanos in Infinity War. This one might just be personal, but I really want to see the Warriors 3 be brought back to life somehow in the MCU. They were important characters in the first 2 Thor movies, but then were written out in the soft reboot Thor Ragnarok. 2 out of 3 of them have blink and you miss it deaths, which is just insane. Justice for the Warriors 3, please. But I think their resurrection could tie in with Thor's current character arc. He's off doing random space adventures now, and that opens the door to a bunch of wacky shenanigans. If he discovers some type of artifact that could resurrect the people he's lost in his life, at least for a little bit, it would allow him to get some closure. Because sure, he got to say goodbye to Odin and even had a great moment with Frigga, but Heimdall and the Warriors 3 didn't get a goodbye worthy of their characters. Heck, maybe send Thor to Valhalla itself where he can talk with their spirits. I don't know, just give me something. The MCU changed Ego the Living Planet's origins to make him a Celestial, and that reveal is only going to get more interesting as we learn more about these ancient beings in the MCU. The Eternals answered a lot of questions regarding these special beings, but also raised a ton more, which begs the question on how Ego exactly fit in with all these kooky characters. Whew. I would like to see Ego resurrected for 2 reasons. For one, it would be fascinating to see him interact with the other Celestials, and therefore tie the earlier phases of the MCU with the current ones, but also with Ego's resurrection, it makes it so the Celestials aren't as easy to wipe out as it made it seem in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. The Ancient One has a history that is just begging to be explored more. Plus, her skill set makes that whole death thing seem kinda not permanent. I mean, she popped back up in the What If TV show with an explanation how there was an echo through time that allowed her to be there or something like that. All I'm saying, it's not out of the realm of possibility for her to Force Ghost her way back into the main universe and continue to be a guide for Stephen Strange. Because I think Doctor Strange definitely needs someone who knows more about the mystic arts than he does in order to keep him grounded. His arrogance might destroy him otherwise. Like the trailers for No Way Home made it seem like Wong told him to not do that spell, then he immediately turned around and did the spell anyway.
Please, Scooby-Doo this crap.
Yeah, I get it. Vision is an odd inclusion on this list because he's not really gone. It's a complicated Ship of Theseus situation where Vision's body was brought back to life and became like evil Vision, but then was given all the memories of old Vision by the fake version of Vision that we came to know and love in WandaVision. But I'm including Vision on this list because it sets up the character's next arc in the MCU. Like the end of WandaVision saw White Vision take off to parts unknown to presumably grapple with this new revelation, and I would like to see this new Vision come to terms with the fact that all these memories he now has, he doesn't quite remember properly and was just given to him by someone else.
I now take from you your power.
Odin had a nice send-off in the MCU in Thor Ragnarok, which was better than the original cut of the film that saw Odin disappear in a New York alleyway, but he's one character that I would want to see again. And this may be a bit of a cheat near the end of this list, but I would want to see Odin come back to life in the present just so we can explore more of his past. Odin has been around basically forever, and I've always wanted to see the story about how he went from this bloodthirsty conqueror to this benevolent, kindly king. And if you brought Odin back now, you could fill a whole Disney Plus show with his backstory. Yondu had another perfect send-off where a resurrection would lessen the impact, but come on! Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a James Gunn movie, so Michael Rooker has to be in it, right?
You can fool yourself and everyone else!
But is there a way to bring Yondu back that doesn't undercut his sacrifice? I think it could work. Maybe a hint of celestial energy was transferred into Yondu while they were on Ego, and it eventually sparks him back to life. In this case, he wouldn't remember who he was before reawakening, and then it allows Quill and the other Guardians audience to remind him of the type of person he was. This would tie into the other plotline of them dealing with the Gamora situation, and it would create a nice parallel. Is it a stretch? Sure, but I just want to see Yondu back yelling at Quill and bonding with Rocket. Is that too much to ask? So Thor was never dead, but he was basically rebooted with Thor Ragnarok, and that makes me think what other characters would benefit from a soft reboot. That might need to be a discussion for another video, but off the top of my head, definitely the Hulk and Bruce Banner.